The laughter stopped so suddenly that even the Roots drummer looked up from his kit. Jimmy Fallon's smile froze mid-expression as he watched his guest's face transform from animated storytelling to something else entirely. Something that made the bright studio lights feel dimmer, the audience's energy shift, and the very air in Studio 6B grow heavy with unspoken history. It was Tuesday night, October 15th, and The Tonight Show was taping its regular episode. Jimmy sat behind his familiar desk, wearing his signature navy suit and that effortless grin that had made him America's favorite late-night host. Across from him, in the guest chair, sat Robert Bobby Martinez, 73, a retired mechanic from Phoenix who had gone viral for building elaborate tree houses for neighborhood kids. Bobby had been the perfect guest for the first 15 minutes. Charming, funny, with calloused hands that spoke of decades of honest work and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He'd shown photos of his incredible creations, castles in oak trees, pirate ships suspended between branches, fairy tale cottages that made children believe in magic again. "So, Bobby," Jimmy had said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, "what got you started building these amazing tree houses? I mean, these aren't just platforms with a ladder. These are like architectural masterpieces." Bobby chuckled, adjusting his position in the guest chair. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, the kind of outfit a man puts on when he wants to look nice, but doesn't quite know what television nice means. "Well, Jimmy, it started when my granddaughter Sophia moved in with us after her parents' divorce. She was about 7, feeling pretty lost, and one day she asked me if I could build her a house where sad feelings weren't allowed." The audience let out a collective awe, and Jimmy's expression softened. "That's beautiful, man. So you just went out and built her a castle?" "Not quite that simple," Bobby laughed. "First attempt was basically a wooden box with a rope ladder, looked like a prison cell suspended in a tree. Sophia took one look at it and said, 'Grandpa, this doesn't look like a no sad feelings house.' So I went back to the drawing board." Jimmy was in his element now, genuinely engaged, asking follow-up questions that showed he was listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. "And now you've built, over 30 of these things?" 37, Bobby corrected with pride. "Each one different, each one designed for a specific kid with a specific dream. There's the astronomy tower for the kid who wants to be an astronaut, the art studio treehouse for the girl who paints everything she sees." "That's incredible," Jimmy said, and meant it. "You're basically Santa Claus, but instead of toys, you're delivering childhood dreams. How do you even decide which kids get tree houses?" Bobby's smile widened. "Oh, that's easy. Any kid who asks, any kid who needs a place to dream, any kid who..." His voice trailed off. The smile didn't fade exactly, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something that made Jimmy sit up straighter. "Any kid who... what, Bobby?" Bobby stared past Jimmy, past the cameras, past the studio audience, into some middle distance that only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, rougher around the edges. "Any kid who reminds me of the ones I couldn't help." The studio didn't go silent immediately. The Roots continued their soft background music. A few audience members shifted in their seats. But Jimmy felt it. The way the energy in the room changed, like atmospheric pressure dropping before a storm. "Bobby?" Jimmy's voice was gentler now, his comedian instincts telling him to make a joke, redirect, keep the energy light. But something in Bobby's expression stopped him. Bobby's hands, those capable hands that had built castles in trees, were trembling slightly as they gripped the arms of his chair. "Jimmy, can I tell you something? Something I've never said on television? Something I've barely said out loud?" Behind the cameras, producers shifted nervously. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes. This wasn't the charming grandfather story they had planned. But Jimmy, to his credit, didn't look to his team for guidance. He looked at Bobby, really looked at him, and saw something that transcended television. "Of course, Bobby, whatever you need to say." Bobby took a deep breath, and when he exhaled, it seemed to carry decades of weight. "I wasn't always a mechanic, Jimmy. Before I fixed cars, before I built tree houses, before I became someone's grandfather, I was 19 years old in the jungles of Vietnam." The audience grew quieter now, sensing the shift. Jimmy's posture changed too, leaning back slightly, giving Bobby space, giving him respect. 1969, Bobby continued, his voice steady but distant. I was drafted 6 months after high school graduation. Never been further from Phoenix than Tucson. And suddenly I'm on the other side of the world, with a rifle in my hands and boys who look just like me, scared and homesick and trying to pretend we knew what we were doing. Jimmy nodded, not interrupting, understanding instinctively that this moment required silence, required witness. There were kids in the villages, Jimmy, Vietnamese kids, just children, who would follow us around when we'd stop for supplies. They didn't speak English, we didn't speak Vietnamese, but kids are kids, you know? They'd smile, they'd laugh, they'd try to show us things. Bobby's voice caught slightly. There was this one boy, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, had this gap-toothed grin and these bright eyes. He'd always find us when we came through his village. Started calling me Bobby-san because that's the only English he knew, besides hello and chewing gum. Jimmy found himself holding his breath, knowing without being told that this story didn't have a happy ending. One morning, we got intelligence that the village might be harboring enemy supplies. Orders came down to search every building, every home. Standard procedure, they said. We went in before dawn. The studio was completely silent now. Even the Roots had stopped playing, sensing that something sacred was happening. I kicked in the door of what turned out to be that little boy's home. He was there, hiding behind his mother, both of them terrified. And I was terrified too. 19 years old, scared, jumpy, and I had this rifle and Bobby stopped, completely stopped. For nearly 30 seconds, the only sound in Studio 6B was the hum of the air conditioning. Jimmy did something then that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up from behind his desk, not to make a joke, not to redirect the conversation, but to walk around and sit on the edge of his desk, closer to Bobby, eliminating the barrier between them. Bobby, Jimmy said softly, you don't have to. I do, Bobby interrupted, looking directly at Jimmy for the first time since he'd started talking. I do have to, because I've carried this for 54 years, and every time I build a treehouse, every time I see a child's face light up, I think about that little boy whose face I never saw light up again. The audience was crying now, not the performative emotion of reality television, but the quiet, helpless tears that come when you witness real pain being shared. Nothing happened, Bobby said quickly, seeing the expressions around him. We didn't hurt anyone, but the fear in that child's eyes, the way he looked at me like I was a monster. I was supposed to be protecting kids like him, and instead, I was the thing they had nightmares about. Jimmy slid off his desk and, without hesitation, walked over to Bobby's chair. He didn't ask permission, didn't announce what he was doing. He simply placed his hand on Bobby's shoulder. The tree houses, Jimmy said, understanding flooding his voice. You're not just building play structures, I'm trying to give kids safe spaces, Bobby finished. Places where they don't have to be afraid, places where they can be children without worrying about monsters kicking down their doors. Jimmy knelt down beside Bobby's chair, his expensive suit forgotten, his carefully styled hair mussed, his role as entertainer completely abandoned. Bobby, you were 19 years old in an impossible situation. You were a kid too. Doesn't matter, Bobby shook his head. Age doesn't matter when you're holding a weapon, when you're the one with the power to terrify a child. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer television. This was confession, absolution, the kind of raw human connection that happens so rarely in public spaces, that when it does, it feels like witnessing something holy. Jimmy stood up and did something, unprecedented in Tonight Show history. He turned to face the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. Tonight, we stop being a talk show. Tonight, we become a family. And Bobby? He turned back to his guest. You're not building tree houses to make up for something. You're building them because you understand something the rest of us are still learning. That every child deserves to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel like they matter. The audience rose to their feet, not in the orchestrated applause of late-night television, but in the spontaneous recognition of something profound. They weren't clapping for entertainment. They were bearing witness to healing. Bobby wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I just want kids to have places where they can dream without being afraid. Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Not a prop, not part of the show, but his actual personal card. Bobby, I want you to have this, and I want you to know that what you're doing, building safe spaces for children, it matters. It matters more than you know. He handed Bobby the card, then did something else that broke every rule of late-night television. He hugged him, a real hug, the kind that says, "You're not alone," the kind that acknowledges shared humanity over entertainment value. When they separated, Jimmy looked back at the audience, then at the cameras. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that make us laugh. Sometimes they're the ones that remind us why laughter matters in the first place. Bobby smiled then, the first genuine smile since his story began. "You know what, Jimmy? I think that little boy would have loved a treehouse." "I think he would have too," Jimmy replied. "And I think somewhere, somehow, he knows that you've spent your life making sure other kids get the safe places he couldn't have." The show ended differently that night. No desk pieces, no games, no musical guests. Just Jimmy and Bobby talking about childhood, about healing, about the ways we carry our past and transform it into gifts for the future. The episode aired 3 weeks later, exactly as it happened. No editing to soften Bobby's words, no cuts to reduce the silence, no laugh track to fill the emotional spaces. The Tonight Show's producers made a decision that night that would change how they approach television forever. Some moments are too important to manipulate. The response was unprecedented. The show's social media exploded with stories from other veterans, sharing their own experiences of carrying invisible wounds and finding unexpected ways to heal. Teachers wrote about students who reminded them why they chose education. Parents shared how they had built their own safe spaces for children processing trauma. 2 months after the episode aired, Jimmy received a call from the Vietnamese embassy in Washington, D.C. A translator had watched the show and recognized something in Bobby's description. Through careful diplomatic channels, they had located the little boy Bobby remembered. He was now Dr. Nguyen Minh Duc, a pediatric surgeon in Ho Chi Minh City. The reunion happened 6 months later in Phoenix, surrounded by families whose children played in Bobby's tree houses. Jimmy was there, not as a host, but as the man who had facilitated something beyond entertainment. Oterd. Dr. Nguyen, now 63, embraced Bobby with tears in both their eyes. "I always wondered what happened to the soldier who shared his chocolate with scared children," he said through a translator. "You remembered that?" Bobby asked, astonished. "Some kindnesses are too big to forget," Dr. Nguyen replied. "Even in war, especially in war." They spent 3 days together, 2 old men finally able to close a circle that had been broken for over 50 years. Dr. Nguyen saw how one man's guilt had transformed into a lifetime of giving. Bobby learned that his presence in that village had been a source of comfort for children who had so little reason to trust. Jimmy started a foundation with Bobby and Dr. Nguyen, building safe spaces for children affected by conflict around the world. The last treehouse Bobby built incorporated elements from both American and Vietnamese children's play traditions, with a plaque that read, "For all children everywhere who need safe places to dream." At the dedication ceremony, Jimmy spoke to neighborhood families and veterans. "This treehouse represents something I learned from Bobby and Dr. Nguyen, that the most powerful form of healing isn't forgetting the past, it's transforming it into love for the future." Bobby looked up at his final masterpiece and smiled. "The children who play here will never know about the war or the fear. They'll just know that someone cared enough to build them a place where they could fly." Dr. Nguyen watched children climb the ladder, heard their laughter echo through the branches, and placed his hand on Bobby's shoulder. The boy with the chocolate became the man with the dreams. That night, Jimmy found himself alone with Bobby beneath the treehouse. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't told that story on the show?" Bobby shook his head. "I wonder about all the stories still being carried in silence, all the healing that's waiting to happen when someone finally feels safe enough to speak their truth." Jimmy nodded, understanding something fundamental about his role, about the responsibility that comes with a platform. Maybe that's what we do now, create safe spaces for people to tell their stories. The Tonight Show continued, but now woven through the comedy were moments of deeper connection, spaces where guests felt safe to share not just their projects, but their humanity. Because Bobby Martinez had taught Jimmy Fallon and millions of viewers that the greatest entertainment isn't escape from reality, it's connection to the truth of human experience. That laughter and tears aren't opposites, they're partners in the dance of healing. And sometimes, when Jimmy looks out at his studio audience, he remembers that each person carries stories, wounds, dreams, and the profound capacity to transform pain into love and purpose, the kind that builds safe spaces where everyone can dream.